Hello, cooking enthusiasts. This week's video is going to be a little recipe involving the burnt cheese I talked about in the update video from a few weeks ago. If you haven't seen that yet, I highly recommend you go check it out. But basically, when I talk about burnt cheese as an ingredient, I'm talking about processed cheese slices that were put through a blackening process held at 80 Celsius for around 4 days. As I mentioned briefly in that video, it is a little bitter on its own, but is pretty delicious when combined with other cheeses. So I am taking things really full circle and turning this transformed processed cheese back into a cheese slice. Now, unfortunately, this is going to be just a photo-based video. I did get some footage of making the cheese slice, but my first attempt didn't work. I was running low on some of the ingredients, so my second test was just a small trial, and I changed some of the technique, but it worked out really well. Because it was such a small test, I didn't feel like setting up the camera, but I also didn't really need to make any more of the cheese slices. Also, because I was working with kind of odd amounts of some ingredients, I'm giving the recipe just as a ratio. The flavor profile I was going for with this cheese slice is essentially the top of a crispy lasagna and or a very hot wood-fired pizza. So the actual foundation of the recipe is just standard low moisture mozzarella. Don't get the pre-shredded stuff and don't get the fresh mozzarella because it's too wet. All of the other ingredients are scaled around the mozzarella, so for every 100 grams of mozzarella you plan to use, you'll need X number of each other ingredient. Obviously, the biggest thing to prep for this would be making the actual burnt cheese, and I recommend making excess, even though a good ratio of mozzarella to burnt cheese is about 20 or 30%. The only other ingredient that requires some preparation is a filtered and reduced tomato juice. You could make this from pretty much any type of tomato product, but what I just did was take store-bought tomato juice and put it through my nut milk bag. I didn't want a filter that was super fine because I didn't want tomato water, just a slightly runnier red liquid. The final ratio of mozzarella to this tomato liquid is 50%, but that is after it's been filtered and reduced. So I would have at least as much tomato juice as you have mozzarella to start with. And honestly, my final product was a little weak on the tomato flavor, so I might recommend even starting with double the amount of tomato juice as you have mozzarella, filter it, and reduce it until you achieve a concentrated liquid that is roughly 50% the weight of your mozzarella. No matter how much tomato liquid you've decided to start with, while you are reducing it is also a good opportunity to infuse some dried basil and dried oregano, and this can be done to taste. The other ingredients that need prepping are freshly grated and finely grated Parmigiano Reggiano and a decent quality extra virgin olive oil. I recommend 12 to 15% scaling for the Parmesan and 15% scaling for the olive oil. Now you can attempt to do this on the stove, but I highly recommend making this in a immersion circulator. You want your mozzarella shredded, your Parmesan, your liquid, your olive oil, and 1.5 or 2% sodium citrate into a jar. You also want the correct amount of burnt cheese finely grated, but I decided not to put it in the jar right away. The jar containing all of the other ingredients can go in the circulator set to 75 Celsius for about 30 to 40 minutes. While the mixture is melting, you want to prepare a parchment-lined tray or a silicone mold. Once everything in the jar seems melted, you want to take it out carefully and blend everything with an immersion blender until homogeneous, being careful not to incorporate too much air. Once the mixture was nice and smooth, I quickly stirred in most of the shredded burnt cheese, poured the mixture onto my tray, and sprinkled any remaining burnt cheese on top. The resulting cheese slices had a really nice texture and nice flecks of burnt cheese. This type of stuff keeps in the fridge for a few weeks and freezes really well also. Besides the tomato flavor being a little weak, it tastes pretty much exactly how I wanted, and it's really fun adding that pizza slash lasagna flavor into stuff like a grilled cheese sandwich or a tuna melt. But the possibilities are really endless. If you have any questions about this recipe, please let me know in the comments. And if you think it's interesting, please consider sharing this. Otherwise, thank you for watching.